Cynthia's Garchomp is one of the more interesting archetypes to come out of Destined Rivals. For the most part, it feels like a pretty consistent and powerful deck, but as with most of the trainers Pokemon, it does seem to be missing something. So today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of the deck and what it needs to be a real threat in the competitive meta. The upsides to the deck are that Garchomp is a pretty tanky Pokemon with some efficient attacks. Combined with the Cynthia's power weight, it gets up to 400 hit points and also has a free retreat cost. It has a 1 energy attack that does decent damage and draws some cards, and then for just 2 energy we can do 260 damage, which doesn't really seem like the best, but we can bump up that damage with the Roserade that makes it so that each of our Cynthia's Pokemon in play do 30 more damage. Now the second attack does discard the energy, but that combines fairly well with the free retreat cost because we can discard all the energy off one Garchomp and then retreat to a second Garchomp that we had on the bench already built up. We also get access to the Gabite with the ability that we can get a Cynthia's Pokemon from our deck once per turn, which makes the whole deck flow pretty nicely, and we're not super worried about ball cards, and it makes Budew slightly less impactful against the deck because as long as we find one Gabite, we can just keep finding all of our Pokemon every turn. And another really nice part about the free retreat cost is we can retreat our damaged Garchomps and hide them out on the bench to build up damage in play for our Cynthia's Spiritomb, which does 10 damage for each damage counter on all of our Cynthia's Pokemon. And it being a single prize attacker is very nice, and it attacks for just 1 colorless energy. And since the Garchomps have 400 hit points with the power weight, it's pretty unlikely that our opponent is going to be able to one-shot our Garchomps unless of course they're hitting us for weakness or it's a deck like Roaring Moon or Raging Bolt. And even something like Teal Mask Ogerpon would have a pretty hard time one-shotting us with weakness because our second attack discards the energy, so they're going to need like 6 energy on their own Ogerpon to even be able to one-shot us with the weakness. And having a 1 prize attacking option in a beat stick deck like this has been really nice. Now the main downside to the deck is that there is no Pokemon based draw engine that synergizes super well with it. The only one that seems like it could make sense to fit is Pidgeot, but even that doesn't make sense since Garchomp really wants to evolve up through Gabite, so the deck is less inclined to play a bunch of Rare Candy. The route that I've decided to try to go for is go a little bit heavier with the researches and try to thin the deck out as much as possible. And then when we're starting to get lower in prizes, just try to bench Fezandipiti on a turn like that and just hope that it works out. So far it has worked out for me, but that isn't really like the best long-term strategy, and that's just going to be a weakness with the deck, unfortunately. This is a deck that would really like a card like the Bavero that rotated last year that just has the ability that says we can draw up till 5 cards once per turn. But unfortunately, the only thing that we have that is kind of close to that is Reverum, but just having the condition of having to discard an energy makes it so that it's not useful way too often at the end of the game. That's why we're barely seeing it played at all in any decks. But I would expect to see the draw up to 5 cards ability reprinted at some point during the life of this card. The way that I've been playing the deck is just trying to go second and establish a couple of Gibles and get into a Budew to start item locking to try and slow down the game by a couple turns. And then as long as we find at least 1 Gabite on the second turn, we're able to chain evolve all the Gabites and then use the last Gabite to get down another Gible or even a Roselia. And because of that, I've only been playing 1 Rare Candy, which I know 1 Rare Candy seems kind of random, but if we ever have a hand of a way to get a Gabite and Arven can just evolve up into the Gabite, grab a Garchomp with it, Arven for candy, and start attacking on turn 2, but I've been finding that most games I just want to keep attacking with Budew anyway to try and at least get 1 energy on 2 different Gabites or Garchomps, because getting ahead on energy attachment seems pretty important. If we're attacking with our only Garchomp with an energy on it and then the next turn we use the second attack, we'll end up with a board with no energy attachments at all, and that makes it so that our Roserade is susceptible to being counter-catchered up and making it pretty easy for our opponent to buy a turn. And having at least another Garchomp with a single energy on it on the bench makes it so that if we do use the second attack and get set to like a lower dead hand, we can just retreat to that one and use the first attack at least to initiate a 2-shot and draw some more cards that hopefully we can hold on to. I found that a lot of the games that I've been playing, I'll just do those few attacks with Budew and then be able to use Garchomp's second attack twice and finish the game off with Spiritomb. Of course, that is dependent on our opponent not being able to bring up our damaged Garchomps and knock them out, but so far it's been working out pretty well. And as long as we leave at least one of our Gabites not evolved into a Garchomp, the Spiritomb is pretty easy to find. And also having the Neo Upper Energy in here makes it so that even if they do knock out one of our damaged Garchomps, if we are able to draw into that, we can just use the second attack with one attachment. There are only 2 Roserades in the deck. That hasn't been too much of a problem for me yet, but I could potentially see that becoming a problem. I figure the 2 we're at least guaranteed to have a 1/1 line in there, and if both of them are in there, we do have the potential to one-shot something like a Dragapult. And then even with just one of them out, we are able to knock out a Fezandipiti with the first attack. And since the power weight does give us 400 HP, we are pretty good at 2-shotting. So even if we're not one-shotting with the second attack, we can just hit into a Pokemon with the first attack and then finish it off with the second attack. Or in the games that I get a fast Garchomp, I'll a lot of the time just go 1-1, 2-2, just one-shotting 2 single prize Pokemon with the first attack and then boss up something like a Fezandipiti, and then finish the game with the Spiritomb. I think I've finished almost every game with a Spiritomb because since the Garchomp does have free retreat and it is pretty simple to get like 3 of them out, it's usually fairly straightforward to end up with at least 2 damaged Garchomps in play. Just every time our opponent hits into one, just retreat it to the bench, and always forcing them to have the boss can make it pretty difficult for our opponent to ever leave our board completely damage free. I've been playing 2 stadiums in here since I think we do want some sort of stadium bump. One Artazon just for the extra out to a basic Pokemon early game, and then Town Store I figured is probably the next best stadium to have in here, just as an extra way to find the rescue board or the power weight. I suppose this could just be the new stadium that blocks colorless Pokemon abilities maybe, but I figured for now I wanted stadiums in there that had immediate value instead of something that might have value some of the time. Also, 1 Night Stretcher, 1 Super Rod. I think at least 1 Super Rod is needed because the deck can start to run out of energy fairly quickly. And even Super Rodding Pokemon back isn't that bad because we can just always grab the Pokemon back out of the deck with the Gabite. Could just be 2 Super Rods, but the Night Stretcher is nice just to immediately get back something like Fezandipiti or an energy to attach. And the 2 Counter Catcher, 2 Boss have been pretty good. Counter Catcher is pretty solid in here because we're leading off with Budew, and that should force our opponent onto odd prizes, which just always makes Counter Catcher a little bit better. For now, I unfortunately think that this deck either falls into tier 3 or low tier 2. Unless the late game's consistency can be solved, I don't really see this deck doing super well at major events, but decks like this, it is always possible to do well at locals with, so it does at least have that going for it. And as always, a huge shout out to the channel members, thank you so much, and let's get into the game. Our opponent starts a Mew in the active, and I played both the Pokemon out of my hand, of course, because, you know, we're on the ladder, so it is pretty likely that we run into a donk deck, so I didn't want to just get donked, and benching 2 Pokemon is always just the way to go, because a lot of the time they will just end up conceding as soon as they see that it's like 270 hit point Pokemon. And my opponent's turn going first was fairly underwhelming. They didn't even have like an energy to attach or anything, but we are up against the Ethan's archetype, which the coolest part about this set coming out is I have been playing against like a lot of just people trying out new decks, which has been fairly fun. And I decided to research there because 1, my opponent didn't do anything, and 2, I really wanted to find more basic Pokemon. And we get pretty lucky to draw into Rescue Board and Budew, but don't find like any Poffins or more Gabites or Gibles or whatever it's called, so that is a little bit unfortunate, but I really don't think my opponent was going to boss next turn, and we see the Ethans get played, so we know that the Gible is safe on the bench. And it looks like they got some energy to attach, and I think they got a whatever evolves into Typhlosion. Nope, they just got 3 energy and put 3 energy on their Ho-Oh and pass. So now we can start seeing the Gabites in action, which ideally on the first turn we get down at least 2 Gibles so that I could evolve into a Gabite, grab another Gabite, evolve into the second Gabite, and then grab whatever other Pokemon I need. and then it just like the whole board kind of sets itself up through that ability, which is really nice. And this is not a very good hand, but luckily the first attack does draw cards, even though it does not seem like we're going to be able to use that because I don't know that hitting into a Ho-Oh EX for 100 damage is going to be very good. That is an option though. I don't know, probably just knocking it out is better on this exact board state because the chances that my opponent gets any sort of attack next turn if I just knock out this Ho-Oh are pretty low. So I do think it's worthwhile to just knock it out and then next turn can try and use the first attack to draw some cards. We are able to get fairly far ahead on energy attachments just with those couple of turns. Now I have the second Gabite on the bench for next turn that's like guaranteed to be able to attack unless my opponent somehow knocks it out. But as long as they don't, I can just use the ability, grab another Garchomp, retreat, and draw some cards. We also get a Roselia out of the prizes, which is really nice. Now I can use Gabite to get another Gabite, and then use the second one for Garchomp and bench the Roselia. It would have been kind of awkward without getting that out of the prizes because I would have had to choose whether to use like one of my 2 Nest Balls in the deck to get one, or yeah, basically would have had to do that because I have to get the second Garchomp out or attack with a Garchomp with a Neo Upper Energy, which I definitely don't really want to do that. I kind of want to save that for like a big damage turn to either like finish off the game or just any turn to be able to take 2 prizes with just 1 attachment. The one downside is just having the counter catcher stuck in the hand now. We are probably going to get far enough ahead where counter catcher isn't going to be live anymore, which is kind of unfortunate. And yeah, it would be really nice to get into one of the Cynthia's power weights, but as you can see, I did not really draw the best this game, and I always wonder if my opponent's playing on mobile when it takes them this long for the actions to actually work out, because I imagine my opponent just used the ability and immediately attached the 2 energy, and then it took like 10 seconds for it to happen on my end, which is always kind of annoying. We did top deck the Gabite. That is pretty nice as well. Now I could get down another Gible or another Roselia, but at this point I'm kind of thinking that I'm going to end up leaving that bench spot open for Fezandipiti. I could bench the Fez this turn, but kind of what I was thinking at the time is I don't want to bench it really ahead of time and just give my opponent an easy target to knock out with the Typhlosion. So what I was thinking was I'll draw some cards with the first attack, and then next turn if I go down to a single prize, I'll Nest Ball for the Fezandipiti before I do the attack. I also think I end up making a mistake this turn, which I don't think I attached the Neo Upper Energy. I probably should though. I don't know what I was worried about. Oh, I was worried about attach the Neo Upper Energy and then my opponent goes evolve the Typhlosion, attach Maximum Belt, I think it's called, and then boss up my Garchomp. But I do think a lot of the Ho-Oh Macargo decks are playing the Maximum Rod, I think it's called. So I maybe shouldn't have been super worried about that. And they kind of telegraphed that they were attacking with Ho-Oh this turn anyway, which isn't even a 2-shot on Garchomp, so that is kind of insane. Either way though, I should have attached the Neo Upper Energy to the bench Garchomp. It's almost definitely not getting knocked out. That would be kind of crazy if my opponent had that combo in their hand, but yeah, then they do just hit into me for 160, which it's kind of unfortunate that they made this Ho-Oh so weak. Like, even if it just did 180, it would be so much better. But they had to do 160 and heal 50, which that can be pretty good against like Grimmsnarl decks, but overall, that is not like the most impactful effect in the world. So I attach the Neo Upper Energy and then decide that I'm going to grab one other Pokemon out of the deck just to put it in my hand to kind of play around in Iono a little bit. I'm even going to use the Brock Scouting here since it's the only supporter. And I think I end up grabbing I thought I grabbed the Budew, but I grabbed the Garchomp because there is a slight chance that I might want Budew next turn. Drawing in Budew is going to be better than drawing into Garchomp, is what I decided at the end of the day. So now we have a bunch of like dead cards in our hand that we don't mind getting put to the bottom, except for the Power Weight and the Fighting Energy, which those would have been pretty nice cards to have last turn, at least the Power Weight, but can't have your prizes early, so I guess that is fine. My opponent does end up hitting us with the Iono, and we draw into Brock Scouting. That is fairly, I don't know, it's one card, so it's not unlucky, but there are a lot of supporters and good cards in the deck, since we've been kind of dead drawing all game. Basically, like the whole rest of my deck should be cards that are like outs to win the game. And even if they're not, I can just retreat to the Garchomp and attack and draw some cards. And all I need to get into at this point is an energy for my Spiritomb. Either an energy for Spiritomb or a second energy for Garchomp. So even if I don't top deck, which I end up top decking, I think I would have been pretty fine to win this game. But we do just top deck the Vessel and hit into this poor Typhlosion for 470 damage and end up winning the game. Now, after playing that matchup, I'm not so convinced that the Magcargo Ho-Oh is the way to play Ethans, which originally I was thinking that is probably the best way to go, just to have an option to one-shot, but that does end up adding quite a few downsides of having to play the Ho-Ohs, and the Magcargo is pretty hard to build up. And I also forgot that about that Victini that has the ability that it does 10 extra damage. Totally forgot that thing exists until I think Azul mentioned it on the Uncommon Energy podcast, so maybe there is a little bit more to the just straight Typhlosion and Withdraw Cloak or whatever for draw than I had originally thought. And that matchup definitely could potentially get awkward with the Typhlosion having 170 hit points, but my opponent wasn't able to get any of them out. They were drawing as awkwardly as me, so we do end up winning that game. And definitely try out Garchomp for yourself. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and yeah, like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. Take care and have a good one.